All right, welcome everyone to a new episode of the Roscoe's Wetsuit Neuro Podcast. I am your host, Toby Passman. On the show with me today, we have a special guest, Fernando Flores. Fernando is a certified high-performance coach, attorney, author, lecturer, podcaster, and international speaker. Fernando is the founder of Health and Wellness University, and he is an expert in the areas of occupational burnout and emotional intelligence. Fernando has spoken on these topics across the US as well as internationally in Mexico and India, and he is passionate about helping others reach optimal levels of health and wellness. Through the Health and Wellness University podcast, live events, and coaching, Fernando helps others live happier, healthier lifestyles. Prior to becoming a high-performance coach and international speaker, Fernando spent 11 years as a trial and appellate attorney, and he graduated from UC Berkeley with Sociology and Rhetoric degrees and earned his JD from UC Davis Law School. He obtained his coaching certification from the Life Coach Institute. Fernando, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited to be here.
Absolutely. So talk to me about the original, so you were a lawyer, you're a practicing lawyer. Tell me about what eventually led you into getting into like the health and wellness fields.
Yeah, that's an awesome question to get started with, and definitely, the crux of a big, just a big piece of my life, right? And why it was that ultimately I decided to make a shift. And so I think the best place to start is when I was getting into the legal profession, when I was, focusing on becoming an attorney and, wanting to represent clients and wanting to make the impact that I wanted to as an advocate for others, I really focused on that identity of being an attorney, that identity of being a lawyer, right? And I really, for the 3 years that I was in law school, and then up to the 7 years, the first 7 years in the profession, so pretty much for like a decade, I led with that. And what happened is, by placing a high emphasis in that professional identity, by placing a lot of focus in nurturing that, the human me stayed behind, and there was just not enough that I was doing to take care of myself. And in 2015, 2016, I had a couple of back-to-back deaths in my family. These awesome men who I loved very much were no longer with me, and it was because of heart disease. And again, that's when I was about 6-7 years in the profession, and I really turned the mirror on myself, and I started asking, wait a minute, am I doing everything that I could be to take care of myself? Right? Am I doing everything that I could to nourish myself holistically? And the answer was a resounding no. It wasn't. I would prepare for these big, presentations in court in front of judges and juries, in front of appellate justices and trials. And I would get really stressed in the weeks leading up, right? And it's not so much that the stress was bad in and of itself, Toby, but it was unmanaged stress over a long period of time that I was experiencing. And the way that I was managing it was, I was drinking a lot. I wasn't exercising sufficiently. I wasn't really, drinking water to stay nurtured, right? And not getting adequate sleep. And so in combination with all of these things, I just took a step back and I said, you know what? I need to do something. I need to improve. I need to do something better for myself. And it was from that period in my life that I then decided to start Health and Wellness University.
So what did you decide to do right at that point? Because I was reading that you did a trip.
Yes.
You took a trip.
I did, and that was a little bit after, actually. But in right around that time frame in 2016, it was the first time that I really chose to uh, start with one thing, one small, steady, consistent thing. And it doesn't matter what I have going on in my life. I'm going to exercise 2 times a week. And this is important because I really hadn't been exercising consistently. Maybe I'd go and I'd exercise a little bit and then I go months without exercising. And so I met myself where I was at that point in my life. I didn't start to say, okay, I'm just going to go and exercise every single day, because I knew that wasn't going to work based on all the demands, all the expectations, and all the pressures that I had. I knew that it wasn't. And so I was compassionate with myself. I was accepting of where I was in that point in my life. And I said, 2 days a week, I can make that happen. I know I can make that happen. Let's commit to that. And I did. And I stayed with it for a good 6, 7 months, 8 months, something along those lines. And then I added another day after it had become a habit, right? And then I added a few years into it, I added another day and then another day. And then now it's been well over a year that I consistently exercise 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. That's my time to exercise. But it started years ago with this just initial commitment. And that commitment focused on my exercise routine really then allowed me to think about, wait, there could be other things that I could do for myself. And so I started journaling, I started making sure that I drank water consistently, just really going back to the basics, meditating in the morning. So I'm happy to share what my meditation routine looks like. And then really ensuring that I get adequate sleep. And then I also let go of drinking, right? Because with the amount of stress that I was experiencing, I was using alcohol as a stress management tool, which a lot of folks, even right now, especially right now, that's been an incredibly highly used, resource for folks, right? That for me, I that's what I used at the time, right? Because it was part of my journey, right? But then it became something, alcohol, that no longer served me. And so then I was just like, okay, I'm in a different place now, because if I drink, I'm not going to be able to commit to my 3 days a week or 4 days a week. And that value of exercising has become more important for me now. So, as I adjusted my values, I also started adjusting my actions and my habits. And I think that's those were the different actions that I took. And then eventually, you're right, I took a trip, a couple of years after I started those new habits, to India, where I got to travel for 6 weeks, and it was a very beautiful experience.
So, did you notice changes like in your courtroom performance when you started implementing these changes to your kind of lifestyle habits? Did you notice like more energy or better focus, like when you're actually when it came down to these kind of like high pressure cases that you're talking about?
I definitely did, and I really appreciate that question, because it focuses on something that I think everyone to some extent is having some issues with, because going into a very high stress, fast paced, high pressure situation, okay, whether it's at work or whether it's in your personal life, right? There is this constant undercurrent of emotions. So right now, whoever is tuning in, whoever is listening, right, all of your listeners checking out this particular episode, there's maybe some curiosity or interest, or there's some intrigue, right? Maybe they're listening and they're just, oh, okay, they're present, but there's always this undercurrent of emotions that we are exchanging nonstop, right, throughout our day. A lot of us become aware and mindful of the thoughts that are coming up, but we don't always pay attention to the emotions attached to those thoughts. And so when we go into these high pressure situations, if we're not aware of how the stress is showing up within us, we cannot manage what we cannot see, right? And so if we don't make time to become self-aware and then to be able to act on that self-awareness more importantly, right? Then that's when we end up relying on different tools that may not necessarily be healthy to us. I have to tell you, when I used to drink, it was effective. I would not be stressed after several drinks, right? But it wasn't healthy for me, right? And so that's why I decided to make that shift. And so when I stopped letting go of drinking, right? Alcohol tends to stay in your brain for 3 to 7 days at a time after you've drank. And sometimes we don't give our brain sufficient rest. And there's also some studies that show that in our nervous system, alcohol can stay in our bodies, depending on how much we drink, for up to a year. And so one of the things that I just started seeing, I was like, wow, I'm able to sleep better, which naturally causes you to have some awesome extra energy. I'm waking up and I'm drinking water, right? I'm focusing on what I put into my body right away in the morning, which is water, so I can get more oxygen into my brain earlier on in my day, which is going to set the tone for the rest of my day, right? And then also, I started developing just a more powerful set of empowering thoughts, so that I just, was able to develop a stronger belief in myself, right? And when you do all of that, right, you're walking around not just more empowered, but just more at ease, because whatever challenge comes your way, you know that there might be emotions that come up as a result of that challenge, but you're also more trusting of your ability to manage those emotions, and not necessarily become fearless in the sense that you don't experience fear, but you're welcoming of the fear because you know how to manage it. And so, yes, my performance really started kicking up. I became one of the top attorneys in the government agency that I used to work in. And it was a lot had to do because I started leading not so much with my professional identity, but with my human identity, just how I was taking care of myself. Does that answer your question, Toby?
It does. I want to ask a follow-up question related to like, did any of your like fellow colleagues or other people like in the courtroom, did anyone ask you like, hey, are you doing anything different? Did people take notice of the changes as you were implementing them?
Um, Not so much. I mean, this was where I used to work. I mean, you're showing up in different courtrooms and different courthouses all the time, so there's no consistency of the people who you're seeing. Now, in terms of my colleagues, it's possible. I never really asked, but it was for me. I really became my own first client, and it was the impetus for me. It was the motivation. I was like, wow, these changes are real. These uh, you know shifts that are making are having a really positive impact in my life. I want others to have that. I want to motivate others to live with just the greatest levels of fulfillment in their life. I want them to achieve the greatest levels, optimal levels of health and wellness. I want people to live with reckless passion and this vitality that maybe they never thought they could live with, and I just became really passionate about that, and I still am.
It's interesting to think like in a your profession with lawyers, you would think that in a job that is so high pressure and relies so much on your cognitive performance, it almost like is like an athlete or something that needs to treat their physical bodies and their brains really well in order to like achieve the most on the field, or on the court. Like it seems like is that something that is still not really talked about like in your profession? Like are people still kind of just burning themselves out and relying on, as you're saying, too much alcohol and not getting enough sleep and all this stuff?
Yeah.
Do you see that?
Yeah, it's unfortunately it's a trend that continues. Attorneys definitely tend to have some of the higher rates of alcohol use, drug use, suicide, depression, anxiety, stress, of many different professions, right? And part of that is because a lot of times, if somebody needs an attorney, it's not because everything is fine and dandy. It's because there's some issue that they need support with, and it tends to be a very intense issue, right? And that particular client, that's the one issue that they're dealing with. But we don't just deal with one issue at a time. We deal with multiple, sometimes dozens of issues at a time. And there isn't enough discussion of how do we take care of that human us, right? And so a big, just a big component of Health and Wellness University focuses on teaching folks. And, I started, doing a lot of just presentations, to law schools and in different, firms and businesses in the legal profession. But over time, it's just the information has really become applicable more broadly, and so we work with a lot of different professionals from all backgrounds, because what I started seeing was that stress management and professional performance, in really being able to manage and avoid burnout, it's something that everyone at some level in a different degree is struggling with. And so I feel that there wasn't enough discussion about those issues, and there still isn't. It's part of the reason why I really worked on just creating this space where we do talk about things like emotional intelligence as a tool to help us thrive.
Tell me about some of the other components of Health and Wellness University, because I see on your website it's listed like you guys do events, you have a podcast, you do coaching, conferences. It sounds like kind of the full gamut.
Yeah, and it's really, if you're on the website and if you scroll to the bottom, there's like the information on the past speakers that have spoken at our conferences, and we have the conferences tend to be, really, really popular because we bring in speakers from all sorts of backgrounds, and it can be, TV personalities, TEDx speakers, authors, doctors, and everybody's coming in to talk about health and wellness. And these conferences are in August and January, right? We have them twice a year, and we have about 12 speakers at each conference. So every year we have 24 different speakers who are coming in to give you the very best in everything related to self-love, self-acceptance, self-empowerment, managing and working through anxiety, depression, stress management, occupational burnout, just all sorts of really great topics, just mental health, physical well-being. I mean, you mentioned it, we've had folks also talk about financial well-being, and I love it because I get to continue to learn from all the speakers every time. But that's a really, really important component. In terms of the podcast, we also have just a lot of different topics that are focused on different things that can really help us thrive. And so I encourage everyone to check out the website, healthandwellness.university. There's no .com, it's just healthandwellness.university, and just find out more about how Health and Wellness University can support folks. But those are the main components. And then there's definitely individuals who would like support in reaching those optimal levels of health and wellness, and or just really focusing on reaching higher levels of performance. And so we'll work with them one-on-one.
So Fernando, you mentioned financial well-being, and it's an interesting one because a lot of people obviously are working really, really hard to provide for themselves and their families. And we know, in psychological studies that, under, I believe it's like $75,000, like as you continue making more and more up until that 75, I believe, there's an increasing kind of level of happiness, which they kind of, from my understanding, attribute to, all of your basic needs being met. financially. And I was just kind of wondering like how you sort of manage that and advise people to manage that in terms of, people obviously take it to the extreme and end up getting burnt out by overworking. Um, but it's because they're probably trying to, reach that level of financial freedom and security for themselves and their families. What do you think of that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and there's definitely a lot of perspectives on it. But the perspective that I take, and the perspective that I encourage others to consider, is to really focus on, what is your relationship with money? What is, because that relationship can translate into other relationships. And I'll explain to you what I mean. But the there's a lot of times where, in my own background, I come from a low income immigrant background, right? And there were a lot of times where I would ask for something and the answer was, majority of times, no. We don't have the funds to afford that for you, right? And so you grow up in this uh, mindset that is more focused on lack, on there not being uh, enough, on there not being enough resources, right? And so it, as you continue and you get older, do you retain that lack mindset, right? And it can show up in, different financial habits that you have, right? You're like, oh no, I'm not going to take that financial risk, even though potentially at your age where you are, it could be a necessary risk, an important risk, so that you can continue growing your financial abundance, right? But if you instead focus on your mindset and go from a lack mindset to one of abundance, right? And not just focus on having financial abundance, but then start asking yourself, okay, what does money mean to me? And why is it that I want to attract it, right? When you start answering those questions genuinely and you develop that definition of financial freedom that you want to have based on your terms, not the terms that somebody else has had it. Like, hey, maybe you've heard financial freedom is $10 million. And so that's what you want to go to. Well, is it, right? Is it? Question that and ask yourself, what does it mean to you? I've met people who, make 80, 90, $100,000. They've reached that and they have financial freedom, right? And for me, it hasn't become so much about, how much money I want to attract, but rather what kind of person I want to be when I reach my financial goals. And more importantly, I have worked very hard on visualizing that person and bringing them to the present and living from that person every day, right? And so I think it's important to really think about that relationship with money. Do you have a lack or abundance mindset? And why is it that you want to attract money at this point in your life, right? Why those particular numbers? Why those particular goals? And really question that, because you can reach and make all the money that you want, but if you don't end up, you know, also reaching this beautiful level of fulfillment, right? And all you're working toward is the end goal, you're going to miss weeks, months, years of that beautiful process of the person that you are becoming. So that's the context in which we bring up financial wellness. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. I want to switch gears a little bit, and if you could talk to me about emotional intelligence. I know that's one of the topics you listed on your podcast guest page. What is emotional intelligence? If you could just kind of break down your definition of it for the listeners, and then kind of why is it important?
Yeah. So emotional intelligence really focuses on, one, our ability to understand and recognize our emotions. That's the self-awareness piece. And then two, really developing the ability to process and manage them in a healthy manner. Okay. Folks, there's been studies around like, okay, what are the most important soft skills? There was a study last year that LinkedIn did, And the top five workplace soft skills were creativity, persuasion, collaboration, adaptability, and emotional intelligence took the fifth one. But if you think about it, to be creative, right, to be in a really beautiful creative state, you gotta be in a certain emotional state. Having awareness of those emotions will lead to a beautiful, happy, upbeat song, or a really sad song that a lot of people will connect with, right? It's everything that we do with respect to creativity. Emotions are present. Same thing with persuasion. If I want to persuade you to do something, I got to be aligned with not just my own emotions, but I have to have some sort of read on where you are emotionally. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to persuade you to do anything. You know what I mean? And the same thing with collaboration as well as adaptability. It all requires emotion. So in those top five soft skills, emotional intelligence, being aware of our emotions and then managing them appropriately, it's essential, right? And so I tell folks, you know, there's by far many things that I'm very proud of in my own life journey, but um, one of the biggest things that I'm the proudest is learning to use the right emotion in the right way, at the right time, in the right degree, toward the right person. That is incredibly difficult. And even in years and years and years of practice myself, I'm still not perfect at it. I don't know that I'll ever be perfect at it, but I've also learned to love my imperfect self in that journey, you know? And so I think anyone that's up for a true challenge, that's a challenge. How many times have we misdirected our emotions at a loved one or at a colleague, right? And all because of something that we were going through. It had nothing to do with them. But if we learn to manage ourselves, we're going to have beautiful relationships with our loved ones, with our partners, with our children, with our family members, with our friends, with our colleagues, you know? And I'm telling you, you can have all the money in the world, but if you don't know how to do that, how to connect with yourself, right? And then also connect with others in beautiful ways and loving ways, then what was it all for?
Well said. Was emotional intelligence at all something that was a component of any of your law school curriculum? Because when you think about just what you just mentioned, like persuasion, so something that you're obviously trying to influence a jury or judge. Uh, was that something that is at all talked about, or did you kind of just develop that through your own kind of more personal life journey?
Yeah, so unfortunately, it isn't. It isn't talked about, and it's one of the reasons why you mentioned in my introduction, lecturing, and I lecture about this, in law school because I think it's just so important for the future generation of attorneys to have that component, for everybody to have that. Really, honestly, if we could all just be more emotionally attuned and emotionally aware, more it will allow us to be more empathetic, and honestly we'll just be able to have uh, just greater connections with each other, right? And I agree with you, that there's a lot there that not just folks in the legal profession but everybody can benefit from. And I think when you, for example, um, ask, like, one of the things that I like to ask folks is like, okay, how often are you able to recognize a specific stress related emotion within you as it happens? Right? How often are you able to do that? And that's really what's called emotional self-awareness, right? And then naming the specific emotion and being granular about it, that's called emotional granularity. And when you do that, right, the anger that you experience from some sort of injustice, that righteous anger, is very different than the anger than you're driving down the freeway and somebody cuts you off. It's completely different. Your body, your mind, your spirit, your emotions have different mechanisms by which to manage. There's like actually 10 different types of anger, right? And so um, they each have their own set of management mechanisms, right? And so that's when you get into what's called SERA, strategic emotion regulation ability, which is our processes that come up to work through those emotions. So when you are able then to, the second part of that is how often are you able to recognize when external circumstances affect your emotional state. That's when these strategic responses kick in to help you manage. So for example, for a long time, I would have like this eye twitch and I never paid attention to it. And I was just like, oh, I have to go and work and I have to do this. And I never paid attention to it. And when I started learning about just like emotional intelligence, through my own research and my own studying and my own just self-growth and training, and I started to go really all into it, I ended up seeing how that was a fingerprint of the stress that I was experiencing. It looks different for everybody. For some folks, it's neck pain, back pain, upper back, lower back, shoulder pain. It could be migraines, but stress shows up in different ways for everybody. If we don't pay attention to that and we disregard it, that's when stress becomes unmanaged and can lead to occupational burnout. Emotional intelligence helps us manage that earlier on, so that even if we experience stress, because stress is in and of itself, it doesn't have to be bad. It's not bad, right? It allows us to accomplish a particular goal. But when it becomes unmanaged chronic stress, that's when it can lead to occupational burnout.
Tell me, for people who are wanting to cultivate more emotional intelligence, what other kind of practices or tricks would you tell them?
I would start with this one question: why do you feel what you feel when you feel it? And it's actually a three-part question. So, what do you feel? Why do you feel what you feel when you feel it? Usually, the easier questions tend to be, uh, what is it that I'm feeling? Okay, I'm feeling angry, or I'm feeling upset, or I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling. Even you can do it on the other end too. I'm feeling joyful. I'm feeling irritable. I'm feeling frustrated. I'm feeling impatient. All right. So pay attention to that. Capture that. Take a selfie with that emotion. All right. So you took a selfie, then take a look at that picture, that image. When is it that I'm feeling this? Oh, I'm feeling impatient, in the line of getting my coffee at Starbucks, because I actually have an appointment that I'm running late to. So anytime there's a long line and I need to get to an appointment right after, I feel really impatient, probably irritable and frustrated all at the same time. All right, and why is it that I feel like this? Because if I don't make it to my appointment on time, I'm going to be perceiving myself as not dependable, and probably my colleagues are going to do that too. All right, you've identified all of that. What can you do? I mean, I don't know, Toby, do you have any thoughts on what you can do in that situation?
I would think trying to rewrite the script as far as what your colleagues might think, or assume that maybe your colleagues are in line at a different Starbucks also running late. Those are
Exactly.
the first couple things that come to mind.
And those are great, right? But if you don't have the awareness and you don't answer those questions, you are not even able to provide those excellent options. Or you know what? This is, I might be late this time. It's okay. You might not, right? In this present moment, you're still not late. It could be that the line moves forward really fast and you end up getting there on time, right? But next time, if you do end up arriving late, just say, you know what? All right, how can I use this as an opportunity to learn? Because I felt impatient and irritable. And those are emotions that I don't necessarily want to be living from anymore. So I'm going to leave earlier next time. And really owning your responsibility in all of it. That, you know what? You pushed it. You pushed it. And, and you went in the last minute that you could to try to get your coffee, which you need and you want, right? And it ended up causing you to be late. But owning your responsibility and seeing how you can grow and learn and make it better for next time, it's also part of it. And it all relates to that self-awareness around emotional intelligence. So that question, I would ask it to myself multiple times a day, and I was just kind of capturing those emotional selfies left and right, just to trying to see and figure out what are those scripts that are coming up. And it was a very powerful tool.
What about for, sort of interpersonal stress? Like, say, if using that example, say you arrive late to the office and, say you're, doing okay at that point, but then your boss, notices, maybe calls you out in front of everyone. And so how do you sort of work on deflecting that when other people kind of project their own, irritability or emotional dysregulation at you?
Well, that's a very uh, unfortunately, whether it's with your boss or just anyone else that we interacted, that happens a lot, right? Not everybody knows how to manage their own emotional states, and as a result, they end up misdirecting them. That's why I say, using the right emotion at the right time in the right degree toward the right person, right? It's really challenging. And so when you end up getting criticized at work, right, that situation ends up creating a whole set of thoughts, emotions, behavior, and physical reactions. So if you get criticized like, hey, you're super late, you suck, this is the worst, I never had anyone be so late, you're the person that's been the latest in the history of being late, and it's just like they're just frustrated as a result of something they're going through in their life, but they take it out on you. So what happens to you internally is, oh man, I'm not good enough. That's the thought. Emotionally, you feel maybe worthless or nervous or anxious. Then your body maybe starts feeling some reactions, either a fire in your belly, or you lose some appetite, or you feel tired. Something will come up. And what do? Maybe you end up isolating yourself. That's your behavior, right? You start avoiding contact with others because you're just feeling down on yourself. In those situations, it's really important to, again, do the self-awareness piece, right? And understand what your boundaries are, right? If your boss told you something in a way that was, disrespectful, that wasn't adequate and appropriate, really thinking about how are you going to, empower yourself and bring this up and say, hey, you know what? Thank you for the feedback. I appreciate it. At the same time, I didn't appreciate how it was said, because a lot of times it's not so much what is said, but how it's said that really ends up impacting us. And so it could be that you might not be ready to respond as soon as it happens, but it could be that after you take some time, you reflect, you recollect, you regather yourself, you can then respond instead of react. Because a lot of times what happens is we react, right, to that misdirected set of emotions that we received. But learning how to respond is really the key. It's really what makes you stand out, just in any situation, right? And so I think that would be my recommendation. Learn to respond, not react, and learn to manage yourself and get yourself to a place where you can empower yourself to bring up those situations where your boundaries may have been crossed.
Well, Fernando, we're coming up onto the end of the show. Anything that you'd like to still discuss? Anything that we've missed just in this whole discussion on emotional intelligence and well-being, and anything that you think is important for the listeners to know that we haven't yet talked about?
I think we covered a very, very awesome spectrum. I think what I would say is, regardless of what you have set out to do in this lifetime, regardless of the goals that you would like to accomplish, um, make sure that at every point they are genuinely your own, and that you are not just connected to them, those goals, those dreams, those aspirations. Make sure that you are not just connected to them with your mind, but also with your heart. For a very long time, even growing up, I recall, being told as a young man, hey, don't cry, or don't show this emotion, don't show that emotion. And I grew up with a much more limited spectrum of emotional availability. And I had to rewire that. I had to turn that around. It was part of the reason too why I became so passionate about emotional intelligence, because I saw the awesome benefits that it had in my own life. And when you make sure that you connect your mind and your heart towards that goal, that dream, that aspiration, you do become unstoppable, right? It doesn't mean that you won't experience stress, fear, or even challenging circumstances in your life, but it means that you will just be that much better at overcoming them and reaching really awesome, beautiful levels of fulfillment in your life.
Awesome. Well, Fernando, it was really awesome having this discussion with you today. If the listeners also enjoyed it, where would you direct them to find out more about your work, Health and Wellness University?
Definitely. And just go to healthandwellness.university. You can contact us there. You can email us. You can call us. All our information is available on there. You can check out the podcast from there. You can check out the next events. And then also, if folks are interested in checking out the past events, we have a Health and Wellness University members area that, it's folks can purchase and access, and all the past recordings of those events are available on there, so that you can get started somewhere. The goal is for you, just get started somewhere, and you already have started, because you're listening to this awesome podcast. And so if you want to continue your journey and continue growing and reaching that next level, that's another resource.
Great, great. Yeah, highly recommend you guys check it out. And for those who did enjoy the show, go ahead and like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, or Roscoe's Wetsuit. And you can also find audio versions of the podcast available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and just about anywhere else that audio podcasts are available. Fernando, again, thank you so much for coming on Roscoe's Wetsuit today.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and wishing you a great day. You and your listeners a great day.